Joining me on the podcast today is Rishi Suri, editor of India's oldest and most widely circulated Urdu language newspaper, the Daily Millap. India is a rising power, a country of deep history, beloved in Australia for its culture, cuisine, and cricket obsession. It is also the country of my parents' birth, one I have visited since childhood, and one which has always captured my love and imagination. Governed now by a nationalist administration and a prime minister, Narendra Modi, whose leadership has overwhelmingly been endorsed by the Indian people at multiple elections, India is finding its voice with a deeper focus on nationalism and intensified leadership in international affairs. Rishi Suri is the third generation of his family to serve as editor of the Daily Millap, and I took the chance to draw on his deep knowledge to understand what India wants its place in the world to be and what it's doing to get there.
You're listening to Smarter Cities, discussions on urban life and how it's changing around us, with Jason D'Souza.
Rishi Suri, welcome to Smarter Cities.
Thank you for having me.
Really great to have you on. There's so much going on. You are the editor of the Daily Millap, and I really appreciate you coming on in what I know is always a busy time for those in the news media. You are the first journalist and I suppose editor to come on the show. So it's fantastic to have you on. What is going on in India right now? There's a lot going on. I notice your prime minister has an ever-growing beard and hair. He's starting to look more like some type of Hindu priest than a prime minister. What is happening at the moment in India?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah. Well, as you know, there's always a lot happening in India. But I think the two big things, other than the Prime Minister's beard, of course, right now in India are the supposed second wave of COVID now. And also some very important state elections. Now, taking on COVID first, the cases are rising very, very fast. We've been up to 1.2 crore cases, which is absolutely unbelievable. The problem is that I think we're vaccinating a little too slowly.
Right.
And once the vaccination started, the public took it more or less as a sign that, oh, now the medicine is there, so we can do what we want.
Yeah.
As a result, when you actually go out on the road, there's barely anybody wearing masks. Social distancing has gone out the window. Just 2 days ago, we had a festival, which is Holi, which is a festival of colors here in India. And the gatherings in some states were just appalling. There were thousands of people without masks and without any distance between them whatsoever.
They've sort of just given up on all the principles. And my family in Goa keep telling me in Goa the tourism season is hot again, and people don't seem to worry at all about any social distancing or any of that sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's. I think people just got tired of it and kind of gave up. It's unfortunate because the pandemic is still very much there and as dangerous as ever. But I on that note, I must say that India has handled it rather well. Our death rate is very, very low, which I think took everyone by surprise. And it was a good surprise to see it that low because everybody thought it would be much higher. Of course, there's all sorts of reasons on why that would have happened. We can possibly get into it later. But the good part is that it is low. And some of the states, in fact, is extremely, like states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, which are not the most developed states, so the same comparison to others, have actually done rather decently with COVID. And so that's one thing that's happening. Our vaccination is going on. Again, as I said, we're a little too slow. We should.
But you've invented your own vaccine, though, haven't you? India has its own vaccine. Bharat, is that right?
Yes. Bharat Biotech is the company. But in any case, a fact that I'm not sure how many people in Australia would be aware of is that India actually manufactures 60% of all the vaccines in the world, not just Corona, otherwise as well.
Really? Is that right?
So we are the vaccine manufacturing hub of the world. In fact, Serum Institute of India, which developed one of the first vaccines for COVID, is one of the largest manufacturers in India as well. But even Bharat Biotech, which is India's first indigenously developed Corona vaccine, even they have been doing it for years. It's a 40-year-old company and it's got a very good track record. There was all sorts of controversies around it because the government approved it before it went through the last phase of trials, and it was still in clinical trials. And it's, in fact, only about 10 days ago that they removed the clinical trial tag on that. But still, we vaccinated a lot of people. But I think they mostly went on the track record of the company and the trust that the people had on it. And it's paid off.
And it's paid off, because I remember reading quite a bit about the opposition, such as it is in India, saying, that we should really be doing this properly. This isn't being done properly. This is being rushed. And as you say, it's paid off. Now, for our listeners, tell us what a crow is, because you mentioned 1 crore of cases. So 1 crore in Indian numeracy is...
Yeah, so that's 100 lakhs, and a lakh is 100,000. So
yes.
A million, yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Oh, no, wait, 10 million.
10 million. That's right. That's you'd think I'd know this, but it's still not working in lakhs and crows. Often confuses me. So I thought I'd better clarify that. But that's a good segue actually into you and the very interesting sort of things that you do. So you are the editor of the largest Urdu newspaper in India. Tell me a little bit about your newspaper and you. How did you end up in this type of business?
So, Jason, we are the oldest and the largest still running Urdu newspaper in India. My great-grandfather started it in Lahore, which is now in Pakistan, in 1923. And 1947, during the independence struggle and the partition, when it happened, my family moved to this side of the border, and we came to Delhi. We're one of the few newspapers which actually published the day before the partition happened, the actual independence happened in Lahore, and the day after in Delhi. So that's it's something that we're quite proud of.
That's fantastic.
And my family, this is of course my grandfather's generation at that time, were all very closely involved with the freedom struggle. My grandfather's elder brother, who was the editor of the newspaper at that point, was in jail for almost a year, I'd say. There's a very famous freedom fighter in India, Bhagat Singh, which is he's someone legend, and legendary stories are made of. He actually shared a cell with my grandfather's eldest brother. Wow. So there's a lot of heritage behind the newspaper. It gets a lot of pressure on because now I'm the 4th generation running the newspaper. And you really have to live up to the legacy and the family name, which is much easier said than done at times. but again, it has its own advantages as well. So I would complain about that too.
But that must be a tremendous honor, though, right? A tremendous honor to be able to follow your family into a vocation like this, right? In a newspaper that existed before the creation of India and the creation of Pakistan. That must weigh quite heavily on your shoulders sometimes when you look at the sort of generation that we're from and the media that's now surrounding us and the whole disruption that's going on in news media. How are you transitioning this asset that your family's built into this new age now?
So to be very honest, Jason, we're a little slow on the ball. We should have gone fully digital a while back. One of the first things I did when I joined, and this is way back in 2003, I think, or rather 2002, sorry, is that we started a website. We started putting an e-paper up. But unfortunately, we're still at that stage. We do just the e-paper online. We haven't really diversified digitally. In my personal capacity, I run a couple of other publications, which are digital publications. One is a foreign policy publication called Global Order. Another human interest publication called Green News. But that's, of course, besides the newspaper. I think one of the reasons why we've been slow on the ball to go digital with the last is that in a family-run business, there's multiple members of the family involved. There's an old management chain. We have, in fact, interesting fact is that our general manager is a gentleman called Prem Nath Chopra. And I give him the same respect that I would give to my grandfather if he was alive. So it's that kind of legacy that you work with. So introducing anything new is not the easiest thing. I mean, most of our employees have seen me grow up, and I used to run around as a kid in the office. So when I now come and tell them that no, you must go digital and start working on the tablet, and they just give me a blank look.
Who are you, and what did you do with that child that used to run around?
Pretty much.
That's fantastic.
So it's challenging. It's really it gives you a great learning in how to handle people, and also take everyone with you when you go. It's a little bit like running a political party when you really have to take the people that you don't agree with along on certain things that you do as well. But yeah,
talking a bit about politics, no doubt. But is this something you wanted to do growing up? Was this something that you felt was a bit of a calling for you to follow in your father and your grandfather's footsteps, or is it something that just happened to you?
So I think growing up, at the back of my head, I always knew that I would definitely want to do this and do this. But growing up, I had phases where I wanted to do other things. In fact, right after school, when I was in college, I actually studied information technology. I didn't study journalism in my graduation. It's only later that I did that. At that time, I was very interested in music. So I actually joined the sound recording studio here in Delhi and trained under a sound engineer. And for almost 3 years, I actually used to work in a sound studio. And I was like the junior recording engineer here. So I did that as well. But I think soon enough, I realized that this is perhaps not what I would like to do for the rest of my life. And I wanted to try it out. I did. I really had a good time. I enjoyed myself. But I did want to eventually come back to journalism. And one of the main signs of that was that even growing up as a youngster, as a young boy here in India, I wasn't that much into any kind of sport. The only thing that would interest me was politics. So that was a very clear sign that I think I should go back to journalism.
Yeah.
So eventually I did.
Yeah, well, that's great, and it's wonderful to have somebody with your background and experience to talk about this stuff. So it's a really interesting time, I think, for Australia and India. So we've been trying over generations. I mean, I've been in Australia for over 20 years, and there's always been a fascination with India and the relationship between Australia and India. So it's always forged on the cricket field first, where the two sides have a wonderful history. And the last Test series here was just fantastic when India came here and from a very losing position with a B grade side, supposedly, beat the Australian side and beat them in thrilling fashion during COVID-19. And so that was a really fascinating experience. But one of the things that has been really interesting, I think, has been the desire to deepen that relationship, and it's never really happened until now, when the formation of the Quad happened and the obvious relationship that seems to now be struck between Prime Ministers Morrison and Modi. You wrote in your publication, New World Order, that you thought the Quad was the beginning of a global democratic alliance, and that somehow this was the rising up of India in a international setting alongside, the other more developed countries. Why is that? What do you think the Quad is for India? And do you think that will actually lead to a more integrated relationship with Quad member countries?
As far as the Quad goes, a little bit of background on this is that when the Quad was actually officially formed, I don't know how much of this came out officially, but India really didn't take it that seriously or was very proactive in it for the first couple of years. In a way, the shadow of China loomed large on Quad. And this goes the same for the India-Australia relationship as well. Neither of them will admit it officially, but the Chinese influence was always a big factor in the India-Australia relationship as well. Australia would not fully engage with India in certain sectors because of China, and India would do the same with Australia. That kind of played into the Quad initially. When Prime Minister Modi came to power in his first term, he made a conscientious effort and a very genuine effort to reach out to China. He was looking to change the entire power dynamic in Asia. He wanted to get much closer to China than India was already. But trade-wise, dealing with China is something else, and strategically dealing with China is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, I think we have some experience of that here in Australia at the moment.
Yes. I think the entire world is seeing a new side. Well, not a new side, but the other side of China in the last year or so. Now, right after the pandemic, and this is last year, early 2020, essentially, I talked to a number of people. I have friends in the academia, the defense sector, And at that point, they all started telling me that 2020 onwards, the entire narrative of Quad is going to change with India. And India would definitely be taking it a lot more seriously. As I said, the pandemic struck right after that, and that kind of added the urgency for India to make Quad happen in a little faster way, I would say. And the entire bureaucratic machinery started working very hard towards this initiative, the Quad initiative. I think now India sees it as a platform to really rise above as the leader in the Asia Pacific. The fact that Joe Biden addressed the Quad as his first international meeting after taking office, I think says a lot to the kind of importance America has also placed it.
And the rising of it to a leaders meeting.
Always.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say it wasn't originally a leaders meeting, correct?
Yes, absolutely. It was supposed to be a foreign minister's level delegation, but they elevated it to the leaders, which I think worked very well. India sees itself as I said, the next leader in this entire region. They want to take on China in everything that they do now. We still have a border crisis going on with China on one of our borders, which is, I don't think it's going to resolve anytime soon the way it's going.
We should talk a little bit about that border crisis just for a second, because I understand that they're fighting with each other, but they're fighting with sort of manual weapons because there's some treaty that says you can't use munitions. And so they're actually in some form of hand-to-hand combat on the border there. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I mean, they've had about 3 skirmishes now, which have resulted in serious injuries. The videos of that are online. Some of them, of course, older ones, but 1 or 2 of them are authentic videos, and it's rather disturbing to see that. You're right, there is a treaty which doesn't allow weapons to be used at that border between India and China. But I think the issue is that China, as you know, is very territorial. One of their main guiding principles is to expand that territory. They believe that a larger part, which is not in their border, is still their territory. That's exactly what's happening in that border there. The flip side of that is that in the last 7-8 years, India has, on its side of the border, done a lot of development which hadn't happened before. They've built roads. They've actually built some infrastructure there. There's a lot of villages close to that border which needed that infrastructure. So they've been doing all of that. And that has obviously not gone down very well with the Chinese. And they saw it as an act of aggression. It was reported that China came into the Indian territory by quite a distance. The government of India, of course, refuted it. They never really admitted it, barring one speech in the parliament when the defense minister did admit that there was a Chinese incursion which was pushed back. The problem is that the only news out of there is either from our Indian army sources or the Chinese army sources, and it's tough to independently verify what the length
what's actually going on,
things like that. But we do trust our army sources, so we do take the word for it.
Rishi, you're a journalist. You're not supposed to trust anybody. Isn't that how it works?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think at a point you have to at least take some version of it as it's true. Yeah. So I think the issue is that China keeps trying to get as close to the border as possible. Sometimes they try and get over the border as well, and India keeps trying to push back. They've actually moved from 3 different zones now to the 4th one, and it just carries on in the same way. There has been Chinese build-up on the center neutral part as well. They have built some camps. They've apparently built a village as well. There are also satellite images there to prove that. So the issue is that it's both sides are claiming certain territories as their own. India is, of course, just wanting to push back. All they want is for China not to intrude into the area.
Yeah.
So I don't see this resolving anytime soon, because China is never going to back down when it comes to territorial issues, and India will not, of course, not give in as well. I think one of the main differences, as I mentioned, is that there's Indian build-up, and also the Indian position publicly this time has been a lot more aggressive than earlier. We pushed back the Chinese many times before, across governments, across defense ministers, across prime ministers, but we've never been very public about it. This is the first time we've actually gone public and said that we will push back, and there will be repercussions if China does try.
So drawing it back to the Quad, then the Quad now has been elevated, as we said, to a leaders level meeting. President Biden is now part of that discussion, and very early on in his term, got engaged and involved in it. But what does it actually hope to achieve, other than dialogue between democracies? How will it actually represent itself in a sort of more powerful bloc? I mean, if you think of multilateral institutions like the EU or ASEAN or others, they are largely economic in nature. But this isn't economic in nature, is it?
So I think when the Quad was formed, the idea was that the vision behind it was to be a strategic forum, so to say. But I think very soon it developed into a lot more. The very first meeting of leaders, the Prime Minister, etc., Prime Minister Modi met his counterparts. The two main things they discussed were vaccine cooperation and a certain amount of economic cooperation as well, which is a part of that. This is obviously not confirmed, but to my understanding, very soon, one of the Indian companies will be working with Johnson & Johnson to bring their vaccine to India and also develop another vaccine. So obviously, it's no longer just a strategic dialogue. It has evolved into something a lot bigger than was initially envisioned. I think it's an excellent thing. The potential of Australia, Japan, the US, and India cooperating is huge in this area. America has been looking to expand its footprint here. They've been building up in terms of their Navy, etc., in the Asia Pacific. But they can't keep doing that. They need local partners to really work with them, local allies to work with them the way they want to. And I think the same goes for the rest of the two countries.
It has been interesting from an Australian standpoint in the sense that Australian foreign policy has largely been very focused on maintaining its primary alliance with the United States while managing its primary economic relationship with China. And that has been the balancing act for Australia for a long period of time. But the recent actions of the administration have been quite interesting in the sense that this particular Prime Minister, Morrison, his first overseas visit was to the Pacific, and he's completely raised the profile of the Pacific in Australian foreign policy thinking, really pushing up economic assistance. Now, recently, a redirection of vaccine resources to the Pacific, particularly to Papua New Guinea, restoring some of that Australian focus on the Pacific, largely, I think, to combat increasing the rise of China's interest in the region. And then if you look at his relationship with world leaders and the government's relationship with world leaders, upon the appointment of Prime Minister Suga in Japan, Prime Minister Morrison was one of the first to visit him, if not the first, and did quarantine on both sides and all that sort of thing to ensure that visit happened. And obviously there's a bit of a bromance going on between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison, to the extent that Prime Minister Morrison has invented something called the Scamosa, which I always find a little odd. They're certainly not Goan-style samosas, that's for sure. but nonetheless, let me bring it back a little bit more domestically focused to Prime Minister Modi and his rise in India. So I was reading recently of his second election, how comprehensive the victory was, to the extent that the grand old Congress party was reduced to some 50 seats in a 350-seat parliament, to the point where the BJP is now ascendant in national politics, to the point where you don't really need to worry about an opposition. But along with that, have been sort of a view that as a nationalist party, there is a whole change in the way India is being shaped. There is a lot of conversation, for example, around Hindu nationalism, what is known as Hindutva, which you can explain in a second, but also around what India is as a place. Is it more defined now as a Hindu nation as opposed to one that is multi multi-religious and potentially more secular in government. That is, I guess, a perception that's coming out from the media. But is that a correct perception? And is that actually what is happening on the ground? And that's my first question. My second to you is this rise of the BJP in such a comprehensive fashion, the rise of some form of cult is being suggested, or actually is it a recognition that the old dynastic style politics of India have that time has come and now we're entering into a new phase of governance in India? So
let's take on the first question when Prime Minister Modi and BJP rise. I think that one thing important to understand is that, like most places, more so in India, one has to distinguish between the campaign and the government. There are issues you talk about and provoke even to win elections. And then once you do win and form a government, there are issues in governance that you deal with and talk about, etc. Now, at the heart of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, the ruling party, the core philosophy is that, well, not the core philosophy, but one of the important things that they believe in is that after the partition and the Indian independence, Hindus have not been given their due in India. This thought is born out of the fact that the Congress party, which ruled India for 60 years after independence, was always involved in minority appeasement, which is absolutely true. They were. One of the main reasons for that is that during the partition, there were a lot of issues. In fact, most minorities were in a terrible state at that time. And the Congress spent a lot of time, effort, and the entire country came together at that point to help these minorities and help them settle and feel comfortable and things like that. That went on till very recent. I mean, it's still going on, but that basically became a very inherent part of the Congress party's philosophy in dealing with people, in the way their politics was shaped. And the Bharatiya Janata Party, again, is a breakaway from most of the big leaders, the older leaders. A breakaway from the Congress itself. Few of them were from smaller other regional parties that came together and then formed the Bharatiya Janata Party. And now, as I was saying, Bharatiya Janata Party believes that the Hindus in India have not been given their due. The minorities have been given too much support. Another important fact, just before I go forward to remember, is that there is an organization called the RSS in India.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. The RSS, is that right?
Yes, the Sangh, as they call it. Now, the RSS is the philosophical guiding force for the Bharatiya Janata Party. The RSS believes in Hinduism very strongly. They believe that Hinduism is India's religion. There's a lot that's been said and written about them. They are perhaps one of the organizations in India which have got the most amount of negative publicity, mostly owing to the fact that Congress was in power for a very long time, and the political propaganda basically played in there. The RSS has offshoots of certain Hindu organizations like the Bajrang Dal, that's just one example, which are very extreme-minded organizations, which are even violent at times. Because of those smaller organizations, RSS as a larger organization sometimes gets a bad reputation, although they have very little involvement in what actually happens in those. Another important thing structurally to remember is that the student wing of the BJP, which basically is a recruitment center for the party, every big leader today has gone through that student wing in the BJP, is called the ABVP, Akhil Bharatiya Vidya Parishad, ABVP. Now, the ABVP is actually run by the RSS. So essentially, if you want to get into the BJP, you have to first get into the ABVP, which the RSS governs. And then the RSS decides that who from ABVP goes to the Bharatiya Janata Party. basically graduates onto serious politics. So there is a very close connection between the RSS and the BJP, and this is what people sometimes forget. Even our Prime Minister Modi is from the Sangh. I mean, they're very much, they're called pracharaks, which are basically people who spread the message of the RSS. So most of these leaders are pracharaks from the RSS. So the philosophy is very strongly ingrained in them. Now, they used this very philosophy to win the election the first time that they won. They galvanized the Hindu vote around India. The entire campaign was based on the fact that the minorities are being given too much of importance. There are reservations for them in government jobs, in all sorts of organizations in India, and Hindus are being wronged. And that was the entire campaign at the very heart of it. The governance agenda was, of course, a part of it. Prime Minister Modi was already a third-term chief minister from a state which was doing very well. So, of course, that was very much a part of it. It would be wrong to say that it was just the religious agenda in the campaign. So I think they clubbed these two things very well. They managed to polarize the Hindu vote in India to quite an extent. Obviously, no one can do it completely, but they did it to quite an extent. Another important fact to remember is that even in the last election, which was a bigger win for them than the first time, only 37% of India has actually voted for the BJP. That is what their vote share is. The rest has not. What BJP excels at is the political arithmetic. Who is fighting elections from where, what the candidate is, what the caste is, what the religion is, how will he cut or she cut the vote of the other party to make BJP win. This is what they excel at. I mean, they are miles ahead of any other party when it comes to the calculations there, which is why and which is how they actually continue to win elections in India.
So they're highly targeted.
So that is,
they're highly targeted in the way they approach each seat, because I think for people to understand, Indian parliamentary democracy is based on a British Westminster system, but Indian electorates, unlike British electorates or Australian electorates for that matter, are very, very large. So, if you take one seat, it might have several million people in that particular seat. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The numbers in India are quite mind-boggling.
Right. Whereas a British electorate might have a few 100,000, right? So, there's a difference. Or in an Australian context, an Australian federal seat is maybe 90,000, 100,000 people. So you're talking these sort of electoral dynamics that you're talking about, that you can really influence a vote when you've got that many people. And if the voter turnout, as you say, is quite low, 30 to 40%, then you can really play around with that. So you're saying, just so that we can clarify this point, that the BJP has really gone down to the dynamics of each electorate and is very good on its candidate selection and picks its particular policy positions along the lines that divide up these electorates properly, so they get there first. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'll give you a very small example of this. Uttar Pradesh is India's largest state. It's the most populous state in India as well. There were elections a few years ago, which the BJP won. Now, just before the elections, they really did a lot of research and I tried to find out that what the key issues would be to win that state, because they hadn't won that state ever before that. They actually narrowed down to 2 or 3 key issues, which again, I mean, this is just a very small example of what we were talking about, is that one was that very few houses in Uttar Pradesh actually had cooking gas there. They had very few cooking gas connections, because in India, you have to take a connection. It's a subscription-based model. And the second thing was, which actually worked into the Hindu ideology, was that in Islam, if you there was a system of triple talaq, which is very much there.
Yes, it got a lot of coverage here. This triple talaq.
Yeah. Yes. So that essentially means that if the man says talaq, talaq, talaq thrice, he is then divorced from his wife. And the wife did not get a hearing. Although that wasn't completely true in a lot of cases, the wife does get a hearing from the local religious organization, etc. But again, that's besides the point. Now, they focused on these two issues. Right before the UP elections, Uttar Pradesh elections, the BJP gave away lakhs and lakhs of free connections of cooking gas. And they started talking about passing a law which would ban triple talaq.
And they did, right? They've now done that.
Yes, absolutely. They've done that. And that was one of their big poll promises. So these two things alone helped them win the state easily. I mean, it was just, and it shocked me that no other party could understand these two things.
Because it's quite basic, isn't it? Make a commitment, meet your commitment, deliver on that commitment, and then tell people you've done that. It's pretty
absolutely. And the problem, pretty straightforward. The problem is that most parties will make about 20 promises and then perhaps keep 2. They made 5 and kept 4. So I mean that worked well. So that's what they're very good at. They're very good at identifying those key issues, and of course, as I was mentioning earlier, the candidates, the way the political arithmetic works. The caste system in India plays in very strongly into politics as well. So they're very good at calculating who would win from where because of the caste community at that particular area. So this is one thing they excel at, and this is one thing that the former party president of BJP, a person called Amit Shah, who's now the Home Minister of India, he really excelled at this.
Amit Shah is the kind of government head kicker, right? That's kind of his role.
Yeah, I mean, well, now he's the Home Minister. The BJP has a different party president now. There's a person called JP Nadda, who is the party president. So he now runs all party affairs. But even today, if there are serious issues which are being unable to be resolved by the party, then Amit Shah does step back in and resolve those issues. So he's more or less like the ultimate authority, other than Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah. The interesting thing here is how comprehensive their rule, the BJP's rule over India, seems to be, and yet there seems to be some discomfort, I would say, in at least the international media with some of the approaches. So there's a view, for example, on this issue of cow vigilantism, which is a concept quite foreign, I think, to us here, that has come out of some of this Hindu nationalism stuff, right? There is a narrative taking shape, because of the focus on Hinduism and Hindu as the primary force behind India. Is it still okay to be a Muslim or Buddhist or a Christian in India? And these religious dividing lines have somehow been intensified more than they were before. Is that an accurate portrayal of the issues, or is that simply media driving a narrative around the Modi government?
So it is true to an extent, I would say. Even when the BJP was coming to power, my biggest fear was that it's not just them who would drive this agenda. The problem is, if one side drives a Hindu agenda, the other side will drive, I won't say a Muslim agenda, but essentially a different religious agenda.
Yeah.
The bad part, and this is one of the bad parts about India, is that there has always been a religious divide. We have which at times has turned violent in many states. It's across government. It doesn't, like, BJP is not the only one which has had riots under its rule, things like that. The Congress has had its fair share as well. The problem is that most local politicians have always played up caste and religion in local politics. At a national stage, it was not done before in the way it is being done now. They're essentially replicating a grassroots political tactic at a national level. That will obviously have ramifications. I would say people are a lot more aware of their religion now in India than they were earlier. Even in cities, even in urban areas, even in affluent urban areas, the proper religion would not be that important earlier, but nowadays people are very vocal about their own religion, other religions, etc. The issue is, again, that when it actually filters down to the grassroots level, people don't know how to handle these conversations. People don't know how to handle emotions that come with these conversations. And those result sometimes in unfortunate consequences, which we see every now and then across states in India. As far as cow vigilantism goes, that it's again, honestly, the biggest reason for cow vigilantism in India right now is unemployment. If we can find employment for these guys, they would not be doing this. It's organization that I mentioned earlier, Bajrang Dal, which is one of the breakaways, offshoots from the RSS. They pride themselves on cow vigilantism. They will go and start bashing up someone who's even suspected of killing a cow or mistreating a cow.
So this is really a version of the extreme right. Is that what this is? The version of sort of what in Western terms we would call the extreme right, rather than a central government policy, is what I'm trying to hear. Is what I'm hearing from you.
Pretty much. It's this is India's right. I mean, it means very different things, like in India and the West, right?
Yes,
but this is pretty much India's right thing, so to say.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Let me take us a little bit to more social issues in India. So we've talked a lot. We started off India internationally. We've now looked at the rise of the Modi government and what it means for India. You participated in the Australia-India Youth Dialogue. It was a wonderful initiative set up. It's had a lot of government support from both sides to try and bring young people from both India and Australia together in dialogue, because there's a belief that, if you form relationships young, then that carries through as people enter into leadership positions. And a couple of people that, we both know well have Sanushka Siamangal, who was on this podcast before you, was one of the drivers. Just tell me a little bit about how young people are feeling in India, and is their outlook on the world positive? Do they see a future for India ahead, or is it some other view that they might have?
No, I think definitely there is a very positive view of India and the world in India's youth. The bulk of population in India is still under 35, and when I say bulk, I mean majority of the population. The aspirations have grown in the last decade, or even last 2 decades, I would say. India only opened up economically in the 80s, so we are pretty new to the entire globalization phenomenon as such. The internet contributed a lot to the way people think in India, the way youngsters think in India. It changed thought processes for good. I think the young Indian today sees him or herself as someone who can actually become a world leader. They feel that India has a much bigger role to play in the world than it is currently playing. They're very well aware of the fact that India is economically now a superpower in its own right. It is a country that you can't really ignore globally when you're talking about anything. It could be strategy, it could be defense, it could be economics, it could be anything. So that awareness is a very, very strong part of that thought process. Now that's international. Coming back to locally, the key issue that India is facing and will face in the very near future is employment. We are educating crores of young people, tens of millions of young people, but we are unable to find jobs for them, and that is, I think, the biggest concern. I would say, if you ask me, the one biggest concern that young people in India have is getting a good job. Yeah. The government has taken a number of steps, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, starting with Dr. Manmohan Singh and the Congress government, who realized that this could become a huge issue in the next decade or so. They started skilling people. When Prime Minister Modi joined, they took this to the next level by forming an entire ministry for skill development. They formed state corporations, central cooperative corporations, which are dealing specifically with this. But I just, the numbers are so big that I honestly don't see how we're going to provide employment for the amount of people that we have. It's just not viable. And the pandemic has set us back even further in that. I think the hope in India specifically now is that because of the issues China is having globally and the way they've been behaving for the past year, even the pandemic, there's all sorts of suspicions of how the virus originated, etc. I don't know what the theories are there, but there are all sorts of theories. India feels that they are in the position now to take on a lot of the manufacturing industry from China. One of the examples is, again, that Uttar Pradesh, the largest state that I mentioned, the chief minister has given Samsung and a couple of other companies open offers of, it's literally a wish list for a company wanting to set up industry or manufacturing unit in India on what all they would want, and everything is being granted to them very aggressively. Some states have, like Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, West Bengal, even for that matter, have actually sent emissaries to some of the biggest industrial giants across the world, asking them to shift their units from China to their state in India. They're hoping that some of this would happen. Obviously, they're well aware that not everybody is going to shift manufacturing to China. But they're hoping that some of this will happen, and that will really give the employment a big boost that we so badly need. But again, it's all on effort right now. I don't know how far it'll actually go. Some of the bigger industries, specifically Australian companies, have not had the best experiences in India when they come and set up shop. So we have some trust.
There's trust here. Look, I think that's an interesting point, because I think one of the things that's come out from the pandemic is this realization in many developed markets of how much of critical supplies that are critical to an economy are produced elsewhere. So in Australia, we got a bit of a shock when we found out that Australia doesn't produce any ball bearings. None. They're all imported. Our strategic oil reserve is held in the United States, not here. When we came to producing PPE for healthcare workers, we found that we only had one mask manufacturer, and it was in a regional town in Victoria. And they had to send in the army to increase it. We imported hand sanitizer. We had gin companies turning gin factories into hand sanitizer factories. So I think this whole concept of supply chain changing to start to allow more of its more manufacturing to be done domestically in Western markets is going to happen. And I think the other thing that has really come forward, and you were addressing this in your comments, was how China as a reliable manufacturing partner might always be the case, but we do need a bit of diversity. And so you find things like the Japanese, I think they put $2-3 billion as in incentives for Japanese companies to locate outside of China, in Vietnam or Korea or back to Japan. You had former President Trump attracting U.S. companies back to the U.S. by allowing them to repatriate funds tax-free, which is now going into the economy there, which I'm sure is being carried through by the Biden administration as well. So there's been some really interesting changes, and I agree with you. I think India has the potential to benefit from all of this as part of what you refer to as a global democratic alliance. I think there's really an opportunity then for like-minded liberal democracies to come together and say, okay, how do we support each other in this? But I think there is a negative to this too, which is, are we starting some form of new polarization of the world with liberal democracies on one side and China-aligned countries on the other side? And that's your whole Belt and Road concept on that side, the debt diplomacy accusations that are thrown around for China in Africa, for example. Is that something you envisaged? Are we seeing a new bipolar world come out? Is this the start of a new Cold War?
I don't think so. At least I'm speaking of India. Sometime back, Prime Minister Modi started this campaign, and he gave a call for being self-reliant. They termed it Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar means self-reliance, and Bharat is, of course, India. And this happened right at the beginning of the pandemic, where, again, as you were mentioning, that even India realized that a lot of things that they use are not manufactured locally. So he laid a lot of emphasis. He set up machineries within the government, within ministries, within the bureaucracy to ensure that India manufactures a lot more, and the manufacturing sector gets a boost. They're giving all sorts of benefits to people looking to set up manufacturing. But at the same time, India is very aware, and so is the Prime Minister, that being self-reliant doesn't mean you cut off from the rest of the world and start some kind of aggressive campaign or a competition with someone else. For India, self-reliance simply means that in case something like a pandemic happens again, we are very well equipped to deal with it, in the sense that we can do with what we have internally, domestically. The concept of self-reliance did not mean that we would cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, or even start off some sort of aggressive competition with other countries. It would just mean that in case something like a pandemic was to happen again, we would be much better prepared to deal with it, with the things we have internally within the country. So that's pretty much the focus that we've had. And I do suspect that a lot of the other countries will have a similar
viewpoint.
I don't see this escalating into some kind of Cold War. Although the story with China will remain to be seen how it goes, because the aggression that they show in strategic interests, the aggression that they show when it comes to trade competition is I don't think anybody else does that. They're the only ones who are that aggressive.
Well, this is the point. This is the point. I'm not sure that the world wants this polarization, but I wonder if we're going there anyway, given the rise of China and its found a voice that it wants to use under President Xi, and the constant phraseology now around the Thucydides trap, which no one knew anything about really, a couple of years ago, is now being used by journalists in sort of mainstream thinking, which is quite remarkable, given most journalists probably haven't read anything about Thucydides trap or Graham Allison's book on it. But it is being viewed, and to me, that's a concern if we're starting to talk about that in mainstream thought and mainstream discussion. That almost implies that we're unwittingly moving towards this form of strategic competition, regardless of what we might want or not want.
No, that is true. You if you do study the trends, and if you look at history, you perhaps do feel that we are heading down the slippery slope when it comes to this. But this goes for a lot of other things as well. The parallel I would draw here is that even in India, again, I'm taking a political example. For example, when Prime Minister Modi came to power, a lot of the people who did not support him thought that India would become this dictatorship which would kill everybody else who is not a Hindu. But of course, none of that has happened. Even when people say that India is a dictatorship today, they clearly have no idea what a dictatorship is. Democracy could not be more vibrant than it is in India today. So it's not. So I do get your point. Studying the trends, studying the history. Yes, of course, this could very well go down the path that you're mentioning. But I think it's a different world today. Connectivity is a lot better. The concept of globalization has really evolved, I think, over the past few decades, and I think it has a self-correction built into it, which will eventually happen. Of course, when it happens will define a lot of things, but I guess I'm a little more optimistic when it comes.
Well, look, but don't get me wrong. I'd rather your view than mine. let me go a little bit, but on that, since we're talking about China, the relationship between India and Pakistan and China and Pakistan. So obviously, we referred earlier to the partition, which, I think as an Indian, most Indians view as a tragic set of circumstances that led to the partition of a country that never should have been really partitioned along these religious lines in the first place. And, a history of colonial mistakes that have led to this ongoing tension. But that aside, you have Pakistan now that has largely struggled as a state, and despite its celebrity prime minister continues to struggle. It has a very strong military that almost is a semi-form of government. that almost reduces the prime ministership to a form of mayoralty of sorts, and you have a country that is increasingly reliant on China for many of its things, despite the fact that it might want a closer relationship to some of the Middle Eastern oil states. An Indian government and an Indian community that I think largely looks at Pakistan as something they have to tolerate, and one that they would like to stop having tension with, because India's focus is on becoming a wealthy, modernized and developed country, and having continued strategic tensions with Pakistan doesn't necessarily fulfill that view. What is the position on Pakistan from an Indian standpoint? And you're probably best placed to talk about this, given your newspaper's history. And what is China's role in it? And can this tension between India and Pakistan be resolved?
That's, I think, the $1 million question of whether it can be resolved. So yes, of course, Pakistan has always been a huge issue for India and in India. The unfortunate part is, and why sometimes the India-Pakistan relationship goes even worse, is that in local politics, both in India and Pakistan, the relationship with each other plays a huge role in domestic politics. I don't think any state election campaign in India has happened without Prime Minister Modi going there and talking about the last Balakot strike, where the Indian jets went over to the Pakistani side and bombed a few of the terror camps, etc. Now, if that continues to happen, it's very difficult to build a consensus to actually improve relations with that country. Now, an interesting thing has happened, and I'm glad we're having this podcast at this time. In the last 10 days, there has been one formal dialogue at the defense level between India and Pakistan. And the Indian Prime Minister subsequently sent a letter to the Pakistani Prime Minister. And then just yesterday, or was it today? Yeah, just yesterday, Imran Khan has made a statement saying that Pakistan is very keen to establish good relations with India. So wow. There are all sorts of signs that some sort of talks may resume again. Backdoor talks unofficially have been happening quite actively for the past, more than the past year, in fact, which is why these things are happening now. It's a complex relationship. The main issue, I think, is that most of the terror activity that happens around the border in Kashmir is from across the border, from Pakistan. They've even occupied a certain amount of territory, which we call Pakistan occupied Kashmir. The terror activity is very clearly, and India has proven and submitted it to all sorts of international organizations and centers of Pakistan innumerable times, is that the Pakistani military intelligence wing, the ISI, is involved in planning that kind of terrorism against India. The issue is that whenever India and Pakistan come close to resolving some sort of dispute or bettering or improving relations, one terror incident will happen somewhere in India, and it will very clearly be aided from somewhere in Pakistan, and everything goes down the drain. Now, why does this happen every time India and Pakistan are getting close to improving relations? Because obviously someone within Pakistan does not want relationships to get better, and that someone is very clearly the Pakistani military. The Pakistani army itself is the largest industry in Pakistan, as you probably know. They are the richest organization in Pakistan. They have their own manufacturing units. They have their own real estate. They're pretty much a business in Pakistan.
And they pretty much control their own city, don't they? I mean, their headquarters is in a different city from the capital city, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to give you a small example, any officer above, or I would say any general who retires from the Pakistani army retires a millionaire. He has a huge villa somewhere in an island in Pakistan. His pension is extremely generous. In comparison, in India, when a general retires from the army, India paid a pittance for a lifetime of service.
Yeah.
It's in fact tough for them sometimes to be able to sustain a good lifestyle. Of course, now things have gotten a lot better in India as well, but nowhere near to the way Pakistan treats its former army generals. And as I was saying, so the Pakistani army is a business. It is a business house. You have to look at it like that. Then only you understand it. And the biggest source of their funding is their campaign against India. That's the way their entire business model works, and everything else is around. So until that changes, I don't see how India-Pakistan relationships will change. There's a reason why we came closest to resolving the issue when Pervez Musharraf was leading Pakistan, because he had the army support at that point. And which is why we were literally a fraction away from achieving peace with Pakistan when he had come to India for that summit in Agra. It was unfortunate that it didn't work out, that the terror attack yet again. There's elements within the Pakistani army, the Pakistani establishment, which obviously do not want peace to happen. If it's a business, I don't see how things will get better. There will be efforts from both sides. I'm pretty sure India will be restarting talks soon with Pakistan in the next coming few months or so. But how much of a difference it will make to the larger picture, I don't know. Just going back, Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Indian Prime Minister for 10 years. He took it as a personal initiative to improve relations with Pakistan, and he really made a huge difference in 10 years. One of his main points that he made was that India will continue talks with Pakistan regardless of what happens. And I think it's something like that will actually make a difference. When he was Prime Minister, a couple of terror attacks happened. One of the biggest ones happened when he was Prime Minister. Yet he stood his ground and said that, because he understood the distinction between the government and the military, and he was trying to, in a way, build consensus within the Pakistani civil society to improve relations with India. And he went a long way in doing that. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, again, the military played false and things didn't go forward. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, I don't think there can be a serious resolution to this anytime soon. India, of course, looks at Pakistan as a huge, as something that has held them back. The amount of resources we've spent, the amount of time we've spent dealing with one neighbor could have really given us a big boost in other sectors that we had the time money to do so. The entire problem in Kashmir is pretty much thanks to our neighbor. So it's a tough one. It's a very tough one. I have no easy answer.
Well, and that's why I asked the question, because I don't think there is an easy answer, but it is a fascinating thing. We'll have to end soon, and it's been such a fascinating conversation. Rishi, if I was to ask you, one thing that you think India needs to do in the next decade to continue its growth, to continue its phase, what stands out for you for India in the next decade?
I think, and I made this point earlier as well, that India needs to find ways to provide employment for the youth here. Without that, it will all collapse. India must set up industries, must set up manufacturing units, must do whatever it can to be able to generate employment. Because, having an idle population of tens of millions of people is a very, very dangerous thing, especially an educated idle population like even So we must find ways to provide employment. And as of now, the government has set a policy. We are on track to at least be able to meet some of those targets, but we must go much more.
Rishi, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I would love to do this in person one day. So hopefully, after we all get vaccinated, you can come and visit us here in Australia, and I certainly would love to return to India sometime. So we'll do this in person next time. I'll make sure I put a link to your e-newspaper, make sure that people see how your family achievement is progressing. But for the moment, Rishi Suri, thank you so much for being part of Smarter Cities.
Thank you so much, Jason. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Smarter Cities. Please do subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or LinkedIn. Leave us a rating, it always helps. And tell your friends about us on social media. Intro and outro music is by Bruno E. at Public Memory. We are produced by Social Titanium out of New York. Check him out at socialtitanium.co.